Tonight's story is based on a real and terrifying experience. Something that happened to an ordinary person on a normal night, but turned into something they will never forget. Let's begin. Story 1. The Man in the Snow. This happened to me in January of 2021. I live in a small town in the northern part of the state where winters get extremely cold and the snow can pile up overnight. At the time, I was living alone in a small rental house at the edge of town. Behind the house, there was nothing but a long stretch of woods that went on for miles. Most nights were quiet. Too quiet. The night this happened, a heavy snowstorm had already started. By 9 p.m., the roads were almost completely covered in snow, and the wind was howling outside. I remember sitting on my couch watching YouTube and drinking coffee when my phone suddenly buzzed with a notification. It was from my security camera. Motion detected. Backyard. At first I assumed it was probably a deer or something. Animals from the woods sometimes wandered close to the house during winter. Still curious, I opened the camera app. For a moment, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The backyard was covered in snow and illuminated by the faint porch light. And standing near the back fence was a man. He was completely still, just standing there in the snow. The strange part was that he wasn't wearing a coat, just a dark hoodie and jeans, even though the temperature outside was well below freezing. I stared at the screen for several seconds, trying to figure out what he was doing. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking. He was just staring directly at the back door of my house. I felt my stomach drop. How long had he been standing there? I kept watching the camera feed. Then suddenly the man slowly turned his head and looked directly at the camera. My heart started racing. It felt like he somehow knew I was watching him. Then something even creepier happened. He slowly lifted one hand and waved. I immediately locked my phone and stood up. My first instinct was to turn off all the lights in the house. Within seconds, the entire place was dark except for the light from my TV. I quietly walked to the window and carefully moved the curtain just enough to see outside. The backyard was still visible through the snow, but the man was gone. I instantly felt a wave of panic. If he wasn't in the yard anymore, where did he go? I ran to the back door and checked the lock. It was still locked. Then I checked the front door, also locked. For a few minutes, everything was quiet except for the wind outside. I tried to convince myself maybe the man had simply walked away. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was lost. But something about the way he had been standing there didn't feel normal. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Another motion alert. This time from the front door camera. My chest tightened. I slowly opened the camera feed. And there he was again, standing on my front porch, just a few feet away from the door. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't trying to open it. He was just standing there, staring straight ahead. Snow was falling around him and landing on his shoulders, but he still wasn't moving. Then suddenly he leaned forward. His face got very close to the camera. I could finally see his expression clearly. He was smiling, not a normal smile. It was wide and unnatural, like he was forcing it. Then he spoke. The camera had audio, and his voice came through my phone speaker. "Hello?" My entire body went cold. I didn't answer. I didn't move. For a few seconds he waited. Then he knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. "Hey," he said again. "I know you're in there." My heart started pounding so hard, I thought he might hear it through the door. I quietly backed away from the hallway and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. While the phone rang, the man knocked again, this time louder. "Open the door," he said calmly. "It's freezing out here." The operator answered, and I quickly explained that someone was outside my house. She told me to stay inside and that officers were already on their way. The nearest police station was only about 10 minutes away, but those 10 minutes felt like an hour. Outside, the man continued pacing slowly across the porch. Then he stopped knocking. Everything went quiet. For a moment, I thought maybe he had finally left. But then I heard something from the side of the house. Footsteps, crunching in the snow, moving toward the backyard. I quickly checked the back camera again. The man was now walking along the side of my house toward the woods. I watched him until he disappeared into the darkness. A few minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through the windows as the police arrived. I ran outside to meet them. After I explained everything, 2 officers searched the area around the house. The snow made it easy to see footprints. They followed the tracks all the way to the edge of the woods. But the tracks suddenly stopped. One officer looked around with his flashlight for a long time. Then he turned to me and said something unsettling. "These footprints only go one direction." "What do you mean?" I asked. He pointed at the snow. "These are the only tracks here. There aren't any leading to your yard. Only tracks leading away from it, which meant one thing. The man had already been standing in my backyard long before the camera detected motion, watching my house, waiting. To this day, I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted. But sometimes, when it snows at night, I still check the backyard, just to make sure no one is standing there again. Story 2. Someone was living under my house. This happened in late October, a few years ago, when I was renting an old house just outside of town. The place was cheap, which should have been my first warning. The landlord told me the house had been empty for a while, but was still in good condition. It was a small wooden house with a crawl space underneath it. At first, everything was normal, but after a couple weeks, I started hearing strange noises at night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. At first, it sounded like scratching, very faint scratching sounds coming from somewhere below the floor. I assumed it was probably a raccoon or something living under the house. That kind of thing happens all the time in older homes. But then the noises changed. Instead of scratching, I started hearing something else. Footsteps. Slow footsteps moving underneath the floorboards. The first time it happened, I woke up suddenly and just laid there listening. The sound moved from the kitchen toward the living room and then stopped. I turned on the lights and walked around the house. Everything looked normal, no signs of anyone. After that night, I kept hearing the same thing every few days. Footsteps, always underneath the house. One night, I finally decided to check the crawlspace entrance outside. It was around 11 p.m., and it was already dark. The entrance was on the side of the house, covered by a wooden panel. When I walked over with a flashlight, I noticed something strange. The panel wasn't fully closed. It looked like someone had moved it. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should look inside. Finally, I crouched down and shined my flashlight into the crawl space. At first, I saw nothing but dirt and pipes. Then my light moved further inside, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. A blanket, then a backpack, then several empty food cans. Someone had been living under my house. I instantly stepped back and covered the entrance again. My heart was racing. I ran inside and locked every door and window. I called the police and explained what I had just seen. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later and searched the crawl space with flashlights. But whoever had been living there was gone. However, they did find something disturbing: a small pile of photographs, photos of my house, photos of my car, and even photos of me leaving for work, all taken from outside. The officer told me something I will never forget. Whoever was under there wasn't just hiding, they were watching you. I moved out of that house the very next week. To this day, I still wonder how long someone had been living under my home without me knowing. Story 3: The man who followed me home. This happened about 2 years ago, during winter. I had just finished a late shift at work and left the office around 11:30 p.m. The parking lot was almost completely empty. As I walked to my car, I noticed a man standing near the far end of the lot. He was just standing there under a streetlight, not moving. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was waiting for someone. I got into my car and started driving home. About 5 minutes later, I noticed headlights behind me. At first, it didn't seem strange. But after a while, I realized something. The car behind me had followed every single turn I made, even when I turned into smaller residential streets. My house was about 15 minutes from work. The car stayed behind me the entire time. By the time I reached my neighborhood, I was starting to get nervous. I decided to test something. Instead of turning toward my street, I drove around the block. The car followed. That's when I knew something was wrong. I drove around another block, still behind me. My heart was pounding now. I grabbed my phone and pretended to call someone while driving. Then suddenly, the car behind me turned off its headlights. That made things even worse. Now I could barely see it in my mirrors. I didn't want whoever it was to know where I lived, so I drove toward a nearby gas station instead of my house. As soon as I pulled into the brightly lit parking lot, the car stopped at the entrance. It sat there for a few seconds. Then it slowly drove away. I waited about 10 minutes before leaving the gas station. The rest of the drive home was quiet. But when I pulled into my driveway, something inaanei made my stomach drop. There were fresh tire tracks in the snow, leading into my driveway and then back out again, which meant someone had already been there earlier that night, waiting. I went inside and locked the doors. About an hour later, I looked out my front window one last time before going to bed. Across the street, a car was parked under a tree. The headlights were off, but I could still see someone sitting in the driver's seat, watching my house. I called the police immediately. By the time they arrived, the car was gone, and I never saw it again. But sometimes, when I come home late at night, I still check my mirrors, just in case someone is following me again.